Are we going? Okay, good. So hello, Rena.
Hi.
I'm Libby Van Cleve, and I'm the Director of Oral History of American Music. We are today, March 30th, 2011, conducting interviews with illustrious student composers at Yale School of Music, one of whom is Rena Esmail, sitting to my right. So thank you for coming here.
Thank you.
I'm going to get out of the picture. And yeah, we're just looking at the... You look fabulous, darling.
Thank you.
Okay. In one of the things I think I'd like to first talk to you about is just how you came to this world of composition. What were your early musical experiences, and at what point did you think about composition?
It's interesting. When I first, I was in elementary school, and I sort of was going towards, I was always interested in music, and I, would always just sing and stuff, and my parents said, well, we should give you piano lessons, and I said, no, I talked to my friends at school, they all don't like the piano, I don't want to study the piano, it's boring, and so I opted to study guitar. I studied for a couple of years, and finally, I started to gravitate towards the piano, and in high school, I was looking to be a pianist, and so I was putting in the hours, practicing many hours a day. And then my senior year of high school, I just discovered composition through a class, and just maybe even a couple months after I had really seriously decided to be a composer, I was accepted at every major conservatory I applied at, including Juilliard. So that was when I decided that I was gonna try to make a go of it. And I mean, since then I sort of come into my own, but it was very scary at first to just have just started composing and then suddenly be thrown into this very big, crazy conservatory.
And in New York City. Right?
In New York City, yes. Yes.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Los Angeles. I went to an arts high school, and
And that was where this composition
Yes, yeah. My theory teacher just put me in a composition elective class.
What were your early compositions like? The ones that got you to Juilliard? I'm just fascinated.
It's so funny. I had only written two pieces. One was a little piano toccata, and one was a piece for flute, viola, and harp, because we had an ensemble that would come in and play our pieces. And I mean, they were very tonal, and I'm not sure, just very studenty, little pieces.
You must have shown great promise.
I guess. I don't know. I mean, it was interesting. I also wrote this one solo flute piece, which is actually still my most performed piece. But I wrote it, just actually for the Juilliard audition, because I didn't have enough music to show them at the audition. So.
How interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. And had you been considering piano by the time you finally found your way to piano? Had you been considering that as a
career? Yeah, I was completely planning to be a pianist, and then I just had this little detour, and here I am.
That is remarkable. So you still I know you're still. I just heard you last week.
Right. I'm still playing. I took a hiatus from it after high school, just because it was impossible for me to get as far as I needed to in composition and still sort of continue to perform. And also I had terrible stage fright. So now it's nice, because now, having been in music for so long, I'm sort of over that, that kind of fear that I had when I was younger of performing.
Yeah.
So.
It certainly seems that way. So what were the influences of the music you were listening to at this very early stage, as you chose to become a composer? Well,
it's interesting. I feel like a lot of people, get into composition and listen to these wild pieces and just get so excited by that. And I was never like that. I was very conservative in my listening. Because I was a pianist, I listened to what I played, and I loved those things. And I also actually sort of had, my first love before classical music was actually Broadway. So I used to know, all the show tunes, all that kind of stuff. I was actually a big closet Barbra Streisand fan, and learned a lot about, the way arrangements were, because she had these wonderful arrangers who would arrange these pieces for her, and I think my ear sort of went towards those sounds. And so still in my music, I feel that I am sort of more on the tonally conservative side, and that's where I like to be, just because I've always just liked that style of music,
Do you have any interest in writing Broadway type tunes? Or?
I have like a secret musical that I worked on many years ago that I just has never seen the light of day. But I mean, what I'm more interested in now is actually Indian music. That's what I've come to love more recently.
That was going to be one of the things I was going to ask you about. So since we're here, we'll talk about it. What brought you first to Indian music?
Well, I mean, what's the interesting story is that most people who grow up in sort of an Indian family, and both my parents are Indian descent, they learn Hindustani or Carnatic classical music. But since my parents are, my mother is Catholic and my father is Muslim, and that music comes out of the Hindu tradition, and so neither of them were exposed to it. So it took me a really long time. People would tell me, oh, you should incorporate Indian music into your compositions. And I kept on saying, I don't really know enough about it to really make a go of it. And then actually Yale hired last year this teacher from New Delhi to come and give a class in Hindustani classical music. And I mean, it took me a very short time to fall in love with it because I felt that a lot of things that were maybe not addressed in the Western classical tradition and things that I had always not really understood about the Western classical tradition, I understood much more clearly in the Indian tradition. Their teaching style, their, very elaborate sense of melody, and maybe a lack of harmony. It was always what I was going towards in my music and was steered in other directions, but I felt that this was a very natural thing for me. So what's interesting is that I know and love the Western classical tradition, and that's where my music sort of is based in, but I have this very different sort of appreciation for a tradition, the Hindustani tradition, which I know much less about, but I'm just very attracted to the sound and the style of the music.
Now, Hindustani is the southern...
Is the northern one.
Oh, it's the northern. Okay. Yeah, I studied Northern Indian music also when I was at CalArts. In fact, I spent about a year doing more North Indian music than what they didn't call it Hindustani at that point. But I also felt the study, particularly study of solfege,
sargam,
just so much more aesthetic, and I could never do solfege, and sargam was like second nature, because it was done in such a organic kind of way.
It is
aesthetically appealing way.
Yeah, the teaching tradition is very organic, and I think whereas I think a lot of times the Western classical tradition relies on your logical comprehension of the material, the Indian classical tradition teaches you more by rote, but it's also the music gets further in you faster, I think, or at least for me, it definitely got much further, much faster. So. Yeah.
Interesting. So I just want to go back. There were a couple things that you said that I just want to clarify or just have you elaborate a little bit. First, you'd felt some pressure from teachers to incorporate Indian music, but even before you had...
Well, it's interesting because, I'm one of very few Indian composers, and I just think maybe people saw me and thought, oh, she's Indian. She probably knows a lot about Indian music. And as a matter of fact, I mean, even though my parents are Indian, I was raised to be very Western, and I just didn't really know that much about it. But I mean, it was always something I was interested in, actually, but just never knew enough about. Yeah, very interesting. Another thing with I wanted just to, it's funny because I had actually made some notes about this. You spoke in an almost apologetic way about sort of writing, sort of having fairly traditional tastes, I guess I would say. Yeah.
What did I write? Because that was really funny. Beautiful music, traditional aesthetic. I think somebody even said to me, I'm going to be emailing or going to be interviewing Rina Esmail. And they said, yeah, she seems to be really stuck on writing really beautiful music. What a terrible thing.
I know.
But so you've got a reputation for writing really beautiful. Sorry to say.
That's nice to know, I have to say.
But actually, jokes aside, I mean, how do you... There is almost a little bit of apology. And how do you feel about that?
I mean, I've only recently sort of asserted, I'm sorry, this is the way it's going to be. I went through a period when I was at Juilliard and just sort of trying to discover my voice in, like I said, in this very high-powered environment, where I felt that the more tonal I was and the more sort of, like traditional sounding music I incorporated, it was sort of looked down upon. And I don't necessarily know that it is here or it is like in today's environment, but I think even 10 years ago, it really was not considered something that you did. And I think just for me, you know, it's taken me a while to get to the point where I'm sort of happy just writing the sounds that I like to hear, you know? And I mean, on the contrary, my musical tastes have come around to the point where I really like things like Xenakis. I really like, you know, very Penderecki, just really interesting different things. But for the things that I feel are true to what I have to say, they just do happen to fall in a much more tonal, you know, thing. I think Indian music actually is an interesting answer to that, because as opposed to just, you know, living in major and minor, you can live in these very nuanced and, you know, different places that still are rooted in a kind of tonality because they have a drone under them, but you know, expanded in a different way.
You had said in a note, which I appreciated, that you sort of thought to include these notes. You've been working to explore the boundaries between Hindustani classical and Western classical music, both through Western and Eastern sides. The boundaries, I found that an interesting word. I mean, so what do you see as the boundaries, or? Well,
that's interesting. I guess I see, it's not as much the boundaries as the way that they can be combined. You know, they address very different issues. And I think, you know, whereas Indian classical music addresses more intricate melody and these very interesting rhythmic patterns, I think classical music addresses counterpoint and harmony, and those things are not mutually exclusive, you know. And so in a way, I mean, counterpoint demands, for instance, a very tight, you know, rhythmic structure, and there's a thing called alap, which is sort of free elaboration of a melody in Hindustani music, which is just a much more free thing. So, I mean, in one of my pieces, I tried to create a sense of counterpoint with these free melodies that would be loosely contrapuntal, but not in the sort of Bach sense of, you know, rhythm and time. So, I mean, that's one way in which I explored these things. Also, just, you know, the incorporation of various Hindustani melodies into the things that I'm doing, you know. Yeah, there's a variety of ways.
Now, the word Hindustani has not been part of my vocabulary, so I'm going to just say it the way I say it, which is Northern Indian music. Of course, there's a great deal of improvisation within a very focused parameter. I mean, is that something that is interesting to you?
Improvisation itself?
Well, that approach, or any improv, it's okay.
You know, I have not been trained in improvisation at all, and so actually, you know, when I wrote this last piece, I had an actual Hindustani singer come in and sing with an orchestra, and it was interesting because I had her sort of improvise until I found something that I liked, and then sort of pulled that and made a loose sketch of it that she could improvise within a little bit, you know, and I think it's interesting how to incorporate improvisation into the Western classical tradition, which is very set, you know, without necessarily making it, you know, having a form that one can follow and not just sort of that goes on for a long period of time. These are all things that I feel like I'm at the very beginning of a journey that will last. I mean, it could last my entire lifetime to figure these things out. And I mean, I just try different things from different sides, combining this with this, getting an actual Indian musician, getting Western musicians to imitate various Indian techniques, and I'm just trying to hone in on something that I'm not entirely sure what it is yet. I'm just approaching from all angles now.
Very interesting. Very interesting. You submitted your piano quintet.
Yes.
And and there was either with something you wrote or something I saw from something else. I can't remember where I got this information, but that it did incorporate these Indian, some of the Indian aesthetics. I listened to it. I couldn't hear it.
That's interesting.
So could you tell me how it incorporates some of these Indian...
Well, so there were two main things. One was what I was saying, the sort of beginning section where there's this loose sense of counterpoint in between the instruments. They're all playing these melodies that are free melodies, but they come in sort of contrapuntally with each other. And the other thing is just the idea of drone. You know, in the Indian tradition, it's so set that, I mean, every singer has their own note that they sing everything on for their entire life, unless unless, their voice changes or something. Whereas in the Western classical tradition, we change our tonic, every, few measures or, a few pages or something. And so my idea was to have this set of drones that would change at various points. And, how would maybe one drone, which is the tonic in one case, then come in with a different chord and imply a different harmony, things like that sort of, maybe that's a sense of boundary, to explore that boundary between drone that a melody is built upon and drone that goes into a different sort of setting.
Yeah. Oh, well, I like the fact that you that it wasn't immediately audible to me here's somebody sort of ripping off Indian music. I mean,
that makes me really happy, actually. I definitely feel like I don't want it to be this kind of like funny, fusion thing. Because of course I also am the conductor of a Hindi a cappella group, and that's very much, Bollywood, that kind of thing. And I love that too. But I want it to be this sort of subtle thing, and I want to create my own style instead of just ripping off something.
Yeah, the Bollywood group, I love the name. Why don't you tell us about the name?
Oh, well, actually, we just changed our name. It used to be the Tiffin Poops, which was the ripoff on the Whiffin Poops, but we changed it to Surat Veritas, which is, looks at Veritas, which is Yale's insignia, what do they call it? Whatever it is. Motto, yeah. And now sur means melody and tal means rhythm, so sur et verital is our new name. Yes.
Yeah. Very good. Now this thing has beep, but as the I get to break my own rules. You can break my own rules too if you, by the way. I wanted to ask you about a couple more things.
Sure.
I had noticed that you attended a festival for women composers, and at Juilliard had received a scholarship from named after Babbitt.
Right.
That was for women composers, and I found that kind of curious. I'm from the generation just sort of where you're just beginning to think, okay, women can be composers. And,
right.
Pauline Oliveros is a couple decades older than I, but of course she wrote the very famous "Don't Call Me a Lady" composer essay. And Oliveros, that was a certain it was pretty radical when she was doing. I just found myself thinking, wow, it's 2011 and this is still an issue, or is it still an issue? That's my question to you.
It's interesting because I feel like I'm part of a generation of women that, we don't necessarily feel that, we couldn't have become women composers, but it is still something. I mean, I'm the only woman in my class now. There are 3 women out of, I guess, 12 students that are here right now. And in general, those are still sort of the odds. And it's not necessarily because we're being discriminated against or anything. I think it's still because a lot of women, young girls, don't see women in those roles and don't necessarily think that they could be composers. And I mean, that's something that is really important to me. I've taught a lot. I taught at Manhattan School of Music, and I've had a number of women students who I feel do benefit from seeing a woman in that role. And so, for me, I definitely had a few women who were composers that I looked up to when I was younger. And actually, Susan Badi, who is one of my great mentors, the fact that, she is a woman and she could understand me on a very personal level really made all the difference for me as a composer. So, I'm into encouraging that. I think it's important,
Do you think that women have a particular aesthetic or they bring something different to it in general? Can you make comments like that?
Musically, I can't say that we do or we don't. I mean, there's so many different women, and I mean, even among my colleagues, I mean, we're all so different, that it's impossible to say, really what anyone brings or doesn't bring. But I think the community of composers would benefit from women because, anything that's either completely female-centric or completely male-centric has a certain vibe about it that maybe, in a situation where there are 10 women and one guy comes in, they're not going to necessarily feel comfortable talking about what the women are talking about. And I mean, while I totally love all my guy colleagues, I sometimes wish there were, women that I could hang out with. Last year there were 5 women at Yale, and we used to go out for coffee, 5 women composers, and we had a great time. And that sense of camaraderie was really important to me, and I think it was to the other women as well. So
I want to build up the old girls network.
Exactly.
The old boys network.
Exactly.
Good. One thing that we're hoping to ask each person today is just sort of the classic questions about, if Lady Luck smiles upon you and the most wonderful thing possibly happens to you in terms of your future career, where would you see yourself? What would that be?
That's interesting, because I mean, before I came to Yale, I was basically doing what I wanted to be doing, but at a less high level than I wanted to be doing it, which was just, to be composing, to be teaching. Teaching is a big part of what I love about being a musician, and so I would like that to be part of it. I also would really like to do something involving Indian music that's important as far as bringing those two communities of musicians together. I mean, I would love to be able to facilitate some kind of festival where, people could come together and learn from each other, things like that. And also, I have a bunch of ideas as far as, education initiatives go that I've sort of been working on that are in the works. And I think, that and continuing to discover whatever I've been discovering about Indian classical music and the way that it ties into the music that I write is pretty much what I want to be doing for a while.
Do you see continuing in the sort of more the chamber music realm, or what?
That's an interesting question, because I feel a lot of times that my music requires explanation and requires sort of very careful planning in order to play it correctly, at least at this stage when I'm still trying to figure out how things fit together. And I think chamber music is a good setting for that. I would love to write orchestra music, but I think it may be a little bit harder to handle at the stage that I'm at with my music now. But I'm open to anything, and I'm open to sounds that sound right to me, whatever those are.
Yeah, great. And one very last question, I hope. What are you working on right now, and what are your hopes for?
That's an interesting question. So right now I'm working on a piece for flute and marimba for Candy Chu and Daria Nikolenko, who are a duo. Also, I'm working on a Hindi opera, which will take the life of Mirabai and use her bhajans, which are her sort of songs, and tell her life story, essentially. So I've been working on that. And also I'm doing a ton of arrangements for this Hindi a cappella group. So that sort of gives you an idea, a pretty broad sense of what I've been working on.
Yeah, it's sort of like what we've been talking about.
Yeah.
And it strikes me right now that the Hindi a cappella group almost answers some of this Broadway side of it.
It does, because I have a very sort of quirky side where I like these amateur endeavors where people really get into things, because I think a lot of times as professional musicians, we're very reserved and we do the things that are right for our career and all this, but sometimes I just like to get in and get my hands dirty and just go for it. And we're arranging this dance number to this very popular Bollywood song called Sheila Ki Jawani, and I love it. I think it's so much fun, so much energy, and that's what I like to bring to music in general, a sense of real energy. So.
Well, you have certainly brought a lot of real energy to this interview, so thank you very much. We really appreciate you giving us your time.
Thank you.
Look forward to seeing where your career leads you. It's really something special, so thank you very much.
Thank you.